A very warm welcome, everyone, to our follow-up webinar. My name is Alexia Rhodes. I'm the Learning Network Manager at the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. This webinar is a follow-up to a recent event that we held at Great Places Housing Group, where we got to hear a bit about some employment practices, particularly around EDI. There's a bit of housekeeping from me. Then I'm going to hand over to our speaker today, who is Elaine Johnson, the Director of People from Great Places Housing Group. So it's just one more slide, please, Elaine. We've just got a... Thank you. So we've just got a slide here, just some housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded so that it can be uploaded onto our website and rewatched afterwards. At the moment, as attendees, you are on listen mode, so your cameras and mics are automatically off and you can't see or hear other attendees. You'll see it, that there is a question and answer function, so please do put questions in there. We'll have some time at the end for them, but please continue to ask questions throughout. And if you did want to speak, please click the raise hand button and we will turn your mic off. And there is a reaction button as well on this webinar if you want to react to anything that is said. So that's all the housekeeping from me. I'm really delighted to hand over to Elaine to tell us a bit more about the content which was discussed during our Explore Day. So over to you, Elaine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So hello everybody, my name's Elaine Johnson. I'm Director of People at Great Places Housing Group, but I'm actually not talking to you today as a Director of Great Places. I'm actually talking to you on behalf of the Greater Manchester housing providers. And what I'm going to share with you is some work that we've been doing about ethnic minority leaders and how we can create cultural change in our organisations so that our ethnically diverse colleagues can actually emerge and thrive in leadership roles. So just to give you a brief overview, so Greater Manchester Housing Providers are a partnership of 25 housing providers that all house people across Greater Manchester. So as housing providers, we provide housing for people in social need. So it is social housing providers, and we house just about 22% of the population of Greater Manchester. So hopefully you'll recognise some of those names and some of those logos. So some of us are very much place-based housing associations. So you'll see there housing associations such as Wythenshawe Community Housing Group based in Wythenshawe, Bolton at Home, clues in the title, they're based in Bolton, Six Towns in Bury, Stockport Homes. But also you've got some other providers that provide housing not just in Greater Manchester, but across the northwest of England. We're one of those at Great Places. We provide housing not just in Manchester, but in Lancashire, Cheshire and over into Yorkshire. Similar for Your Housing. And then there's Riverside and Regenda, who are based over in Merseyside. Riverside actually is quite national, as are the Guinness Housing Partnership. So you've got a real plethora there of different sized organisations, but we're all doing the same thing. We are all absolutely focused on providing homes, good quality homes for people in housing need. And we are a unique partnership across the country where there is a lot of housing providers. We are part of the country that work together very, very collaboratively. And I suppose that's come about because of the way that Greater Manchester works with the combined authorities, all working closely together for the good of everybody that lives here. So as I say, this is what I'm going to talk to you about today is an initiative that we've all worked together, the 25 organisations have all worked together, and it's specifically looking at equality, diversity and inclusion, but looking at how we really create paths into leadership for colleagues from diverse backgrounds. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of where this project came from. So in 2018, there was the CABE report, which was looking at housing nationally. And what that report showed was that the housing sector, so organisations that work in social housing, were overwhelmingly led by white people. So they did a survey, 64 of the UK housing associations responded to that. And in the survey, what we found is there were only 3 chief executives from Black and Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, and only 12 that were executives, and that was out of 330 roles. And it also showed that leadership teams, so looking sort of beyond just the executive teams, but looking into the sort of heads of service role and sort of senior manager roles, and nearly 3/4 of housing associations found that they were led by white male executives, and also that hadn't changed in the previous 2 years. Now, when you just sit and reflect on that, if you think of our customers, so the people that live in our homes, we actually house more people from Black and Asian backgrounds. So 44% of people that live in our homes come from Black African backgrounds, 40% are from Black Caribbean homes, and actually there is a disproportionate amount of people from ethnically diverse backgrounds that live in social housing than don't. So when you think of that in that context, it really shows that we are not led by the people that we are there to serve. And then further from that, we've just had the Better Social Housing Review, which has looked at how we actually deliver services. And what that's found is that of our customer base, the people that live in our poorest quality homes, those are our inner city properties, where the stock quality is poor, that are harder to repair, that have damp and mould issues and less access to green places. They are people from ethnically diverse backgrounds. The people that live in their homes disproportionately are from those ethnic backgrounds. And when you put those two things together and you say, on the one hand, we're led by white people, and then we've got a customer base which is more about sort of ethnically diverse customers, and then on top of that, the people that live in our worst quality homes. You have to say that actually we've got an issue here. So this was recognised, and in Greater Manchester we pulled together a report which we call the DICE report. So DICE stands for Diversity, Inclusion, Community Cohesion and Equality. And what we did was a baseline report to understand who actually works in our organisations. So this was looking from who was on our board, who were in our senior teams, who were in our colleague teams. And we found the same sort of pattern. So at that time, there were 19 members of the Greater Manchester Housing Partnership. Of those 19 members, there was only one chief executive that was non-white, there's her picture there. But actually, when you look at that, so Sim, who is our one non-white CEO, actually runs a niche housing association for people from ethnic minority backgrounds. But from the mainstream housing associations, there was no non-white chief executives. And in the leadership team, which covers that heads of service team, at least 90% of those organisations, those roles were held by white people, and only 8 had a leadership team that wasn't 100% white. So what I've also put on this slide here is this sort of diagram at the back. So this is of the 19, and it shows the reflection of the ethnic backgrounds of various different people associated with that housing provider. So in the blue is the customers. So you can see here customers. You can see we've got the representatives from lots of different backgrounds in our customer range. The orange is our workforce. So we do have quite a lot of representation in our workforce. The grey is our board members, but then this yellow line at the front shows our leadership teams. And when we sort of looked in detail at where our ethnically diverse colleagues were, we had a lot of representation, but they were mainly at the sort of lower levels within our organisations. They were in the entry level areas, they were in the lower paid areas, and there was no there wasn't that representative at more senior levels. And actually it was quite shocking for us, because as housing associations, we all have values. A lot of our values are around equality, diversity, inclusion, and we think we're very fair organisations. But when you looked at the data, it showed us that there was obviously an issue. There was a reason why some of our really talented colleagues from diverse backgrounds were just not coming through those pathways, were just not coming into leadership. And it was a bit of a burning platform for us to understand that, particularly in the context of the fact that a lot of our customers are from those diverse backgrounds. So what we then started to look at is what were our intentions and what were our impact. And obviously, as I was saying before, we all have our values around equality and diversity, and our intentions were good, but our impact, what we were actually achieving, was very different. And for some reason, there were some issues there. So working with Manchester Metropolitan University, we introduced a pilot project called Boost. And what Boost was about was thinking about how we championed change for our Black, Asian and minoritised ethnic backgrounds. And at the time, we were using the phrase BAME because that was the wording, the language that was sort of used by government and by everybody at that time. Interestingly, in the time that we've been working on that, that's sort of fallen out of favour. And certainly when we talk to our Black, Asian and minoritised ethnic colleagues, it's a phrase they really, really don't like. And it's one of the learns from the project that language around this is evolving all the time. So we actually don't use that expression anymore. But for the pilot project, that's what it was called. It was called the BAME Leadership Programme. And what we did in our BAME Leadership Programme was to do a reciprocal mentoring scheme. So the way the reciprocal mentoring scheme worked was that we looked at some of our very talented colleagues from diverse backgrounds that had the potential to move into leadership roles, and we put in place a mentoring scheme for their career progression. But it was a reciprocal mentoring scheme. So while the mentees had a relationship with some mentors and the mentor would help them with their career and their development, there was a reciprocal nature to it, in that the mentors were all our male white leaders in their organisations. And the reciprocal nature of it was that while they were doing their mentoring and career mentoring, they were also talking to their mentee about the lived experience of being Black, Asian, or from a minority ethnic group, what that experience was working in housing and working in our organisations. And the idea was that in this trusted space of this mentoring relationship, there was lots of learning going on. The mentee was learning about how they can move into those leadership roles, but the mentors were really understanding what some of the barriers were for our talented colleagues from diverse backgrounds to getting into leadership roles. And in each organisation, we had a mentor and a mentee, and the mentor and the mentee were from different organisations across the partnership. So a mentee in one organisation would have a mentor who was a senior leader in one of the other organisations. Back in the home organisation, so where the mentee came from, there was also a change champion. And the change champion was charged with talking to mentors and mentees, understanding what some of the barriers were, and starting to think about changes that organisations needed to make in order to create these pathways into leadership. So this was a pilot programme, and we started to learn a lot of things about our organisations, which as white people, we thought were very fair and open and that everybody had the same opportunities. But what we started to learn is that that wasn't quite the case. So the first thing that we learned was there was an absence of real role models. And this goes back to that thinking that if you can't see it, you can't be it. So if you can't see faces like yours at senior levels, you don't actually believe that that is possible. And that's a two-way street, really. That's thinking, A, it's not possible for somebody from your background to get there, but B, it might not be possible because the organisation might not be open to that. So that was one of our learns. We also learned that some of our line management was quite poor, in that on occasions they did not deal with some situations in quite the right way. And what we learned was though people weren't trying to do things deliberately, what happened was just in the way that the organisation worked, it wasn't particularly open or understanding of some of the issues that some of our minority colleagues faced. We also learned about our recruitment and selection processes, and that in a lot of cases we see people like me, rather than really thinking about how we celebrated diversity and the different strengths of some of our applicants, particularly some of their deep knowledge of our customers and our neighbourhoods where there were very diverse communities. And we also found that we were very white organisations that worked from a very white standpoint. And actually one of the big learns was that for some of our ethnically diverse colleagues to succeed, they sort of couldn't continue to be themselves. They had to start to sort of almost adopt a white culture for them to get on in the organisation. So what we learned was that actually we didn't need to change individuals, we actually needed to change organisations to really genuinely embrace diversity. So when we got to the end of the programme, we did a fairly robust evaluation. MMU did it for us, and they came in and had a really robust look. And what we learned from our reciprocal mentoring is that our mentees and our mentors really reported career development. And some of our mentees went on to get promoted both within their own organisations, across the sector, and some of them actually moved out of the sector, but actually they absolutely benefited from that career mentoring, and that was very, very strong. They benefited from it both in terms of the learning, but also in terms of somebody at a senior level taking an interest in them and noticing their career and actually advocating on their behalf, and also introducing them to some of their networks. And that was really quite a big learn. And one of the things that came out of the whole programme is that happens almost naturally for white leaders. So a lot of people who move into leadership roles, if they look back on how that happened, it's because they had somebody at a senior leadership level standing in their corner and advocating for them, and perhaps putting their name forward when a project came along, or when a development opportunity came along, or actually tapping them on the shoulder when a certain position came available. And what we noticed is people tend to do that to people like them. So if you can see somebody in your shadow that reminds you of where you were in your career, then you'd take an interest in their career and you think that person was just like me 10 years ago, and you help them. What didn't happen is that didn't happen across different backgrounds. So it didn't happen between white people and Asian people. It didn't happen between white people and black people, or white people and people from Eastern European countries. It tended to be they looked out for people like them. So that was quite a big learn for us. The other thing we learned was that mentees were very brave at how they shared their experiences of unfairness and discrimination. And in this first pilot, I was a change champion. And actually, some of the stories that I heard really shocked me, from how I viewed it to how it felt to the person on the receiving end of it. And there were a couple of those meetings where actually we ended up in tears because it was so emotional of some of the things that our mentees had been through, and also sometimes how they were treated by some of our customers. But the other big learn was where we if we wanted to change organisations, the role of change champion was key. And I mean, there's been quite a lot of research subsequent to this, but I think we were at the forefront of it when we realised that actually how we create really diverse and inclusive organisations is the responsibility of white people. And it's not until white people start taking this seriously and really, really understanding it that actually there will be a difference and things will start to happen. And if you talk to a lot of our Black and Asian and minority ethnic colleagues, they're tired of talking about it. They're tired of trying to create change. And it's time for us as white people to pick that up and to change our organisations, because in this relationship, we are the ones with the power to do the change, and our change champions were really key. I just wanted to share with you this quote from Devon. So Devon was a change champion, and Devon is, his background is Black African, and this was something he said when we were working on the programme. And he had worked for Manchester City Council for many years and been very, very frustrated and really, really tried to change the landscape, to change the organisation for himself and his Black colleagues. And he was one of those people that were tired. And if he was here, he would tell you he was actually at the point of resigning and giving up because he didn't think there'd ever be any change. But then suddenly, when the white executives, when the white senior leaders had heard the lived experience and really shared some of the pain and the hurt of how some of our diverse colleagues felt, and then started to really pick up the mantle and want to make change, that actually that was really exciting for him, and he really felt a difference and that things were going to change. We also learned that the white leaders, I said both the mentors and the mentees changed during this programme. White leaders absolutely benefited from reflecting on how they'd got to where they'd got to, and how things had been different for them than some of their other colleagues. And that was a massive learn for them in terms of how they thought about their colleagues in their organisation, but also how they thought about their communities as well. In the organisations, we all made a commitment to actually doing our ethnicity pay gap reporting as well as our gender pay gap reporting, and we've all done that subsequently, and we're all starting to learn from that on the basis that once you start to see that, it makes you think about what's happening in organisations and why we're not getting people into those leadership roles. And the other thing that we learned is if we want to make change, we absolutely needed the commitment of the top people in the organisation. We really needed to engage chief executives. So some of the things that get in the way, one of the things that came out of the evaluation is that this is quite difficult for white people to deal with, in that quite often there is a distance between how we've always lived our lives and things have happened for us and some of our colleagues that are from ethnic minority backgrounds. There is that difference, and until you sit in the room and absolutely talk through some of the lived experience, you don't understand the first-hand experience and you don't see it. You don't actually stand in their shoes and realise some of the things that have happened and what some of the barriers are and some of the impacts of it. And we also found quite a lot of defensiveness. It's hard to hear, and it's actually painful to hear. And it's also quite painful to then reflect on your organisations that have got values of fairness and actually people that are very, very committed to fairness. And we all think we're being fair and equal, and suddenly realising that actually it's quite white-centric. And actually to make this change, there is certain threats. So first of all, you know, in terms of opening up some of those positions, then you're going to have that positional threat. Everybody always thinks they've got to where they've got to because they've earned it and worked really, really hard. And there is that thing, well, actually, is somebody else been working as hard, but they've hit more barriers than I have. And there is also that sort of evidence of people feeling quite bad about what's happened and sort of trying to come to terms with that. So there's awful lot of emotion around this. And then the other thing we found is some denial as well when we talk to people, the sort of non-belief that sort of thing could be happening in our organisations. So those are three of the things that we really had to deal with head on and have some very difficult conversations about. So all the learns that were pulled together in this document, which is actually the outcomes and the evaluation of that first pilot project. And that is available if anybody wants to read it. It is a really interesting read. But on the back of that, we have now introduced a longer term programme, where we incorporate the learnings of this first pilot programme. So where we started from, as I mentioned, was the data. So we did our first DICE benchmark survey in 2020, which at the time we thought was actually quite a basic thing. But then we realised when it went through to the National Housing Federation that actually we were the first group of housing associations to pull together the data. And I'm pleased to say that lots of other parts of the country are now starting this journey of looking at the data. We've been asked to be involved in it happening in the east coast of the country and also in Yorkshire. But data is where to start, and data sort of gives you the insight that you need to know what you need to be looking at. We've now changed it. We don't talk about reciprocal mentoring anymore. We talk about disruptive mentoring. So the disruptive mentoring is actually using the learning to disrupt our organisations and to make some positive change. We've changed talking about the programme, because when we first introduced it, we talked about the reciprocal mentoring being the centre of it. We've now realised that actually that was just the key to opening the window on what we needed to talk about. This is actually about cultural change and developing a movement of people to actually support that change across all our organisations. It is about systems change. It is about our policies. It is about how we deal with abusive incidents. It is about our whole systems approach to this. And it is about thinking about the impacts on our colleagues and then what we need to do for inclusive service delivery and using that learning in a very holistic way. And it is about evaluation. So we pulled all this together. So those are the strands of the new project, and very much it's about building a movement of allies to create that change in our organisations. And we have named our project Boost, in that it is going to boost the careers of some of our ethnically diverse colleagues, but also boost the effectiveness of our organisations. So what we have is monthly reciprocal mentoring. So we have our white senior executives and our talented mentees from different diverse backgrounds, and they have a monthly discussion which is careers guidance for the mentee, and for the mentor it's learning about that lived experience of the mentee, and they jointly reflect on what needs to change in the organisation. And that happens, so your mentor and your mentee are from different organisations, but each mentor and mentee then takes that back into their own organisation, where they have a meeting with within their organisation, their mentor, their mentee, to talk about what they've learned, with a change champion. But we've also included the HR representative, because a lot of this is about policies, a lot of it is about procedures and guidance and recruitment and internal promotions, etc., and the CEO. And in each organisation, they have identified a change project from those discussions, and they are all working together to deliver that change project. The thinking being the organisation needs to change, not the individuals. Each of those people, so the mentors, the mentees, the change champion, the HR rep, the CEO, all become allies. And as allies in their own organisation, they're also allies within the sector. So once a quarter, we bring all those people together to discuss some of the learning, to discuss what's coming out of the programme, and actually to make some of the collective changes that we need to make across the sector. And we continue to do that monitoring and evaluation of the programme and what we're learning. So the actual programme has been supported by, we did a launch event of all the movement of the change agents and sort of laid out what the expectations were. There is a mentoring contract in place, and the mentoring we do through the GROW model. So any of you that are familiar with coaching will be familiar with the GROW model, and that's the one that's at the centre of our mentoring relationships. And we have the change champions, and the change champions meet monthly to feed in their learning and also to feed in where each organisation's up to in their change programme. And we also have a meeting of the mentees on a monthly basis. And actually, one of the things that's come out of that is some issues around psychological safety for quite a lot of our mentees. It's quite a brave thing to do, to raise some of the issues and to raise challenges to your organisation. So we've done a lot of work on psychological safety, but also resilience, and also the understanding of the unevenness across the cohort of organisations, because we've got 25 organisations and they're in different places. So progress is different in each of those organisations. And we monitor the change teams and the change projects, and also that wider communication across Greater Manchester housing providers, but also across the sector as well. So some of the things that we've had to deal with, and in some cases it is quite difficult, some of this stuff. It's not easy. And one of the things we've learned is we really need to tolerate discomfort and almost be comfortable being really, really uncomfortable about some of the things. It is a very difficult thing to do, to talk about race and ethnicity and how that plays out. And we've got some things wrong, and we need to understand how we've got things wrong and try and talk that through. In our allies meetings, we've had lots of discussions about how race shapes some of the norms in our organisations and in our societies, and for our customers and for our communities, and to think about actually what we need to do to pull some levers or push some things to actually ensure that we do get really inclusive neighbourhoods and really inclusive organisations. One of the things that we've reflected quite a lot on is for everybody to appreciate the role race and ethnicity has played in our own life story. And one of my very big learns on this project was the day somebody asked me when I first realised I was white. And I've been asked a lot of questions in my career and in my life, and that's one of the moments and one of the questions that really sticks out in my mind as being a question that really quite shook me. Because actually, when I was asked the question, when did you realise you were white? I sort of never did. It was just how I was. And I've never really thought about being white as being a race, because that's the society that I live in. And actually, the person that asked me about that question, who was black, actually then could say very clearly the moment when they were at school, when they realised they were black and they were treated in a certain way as a result of that, and that when they went home and talked to their parents about it, the response was, well, get used to it, that's your life. And actually that was a real moment for me, sort of appreciating the differences that race makes right from the very beginning of our life stories. We also talk about becoming aware of those biases and some of the privileges that we have in different parts of our lives, and also owning our own expertise of our experiences and being able to share that and learn from others. So part of this journey has been genuinely, we all talk about celebrating difference and celebrating diversity, but actually really doing that, really celebrating that in terms of learning from other people and bringing their experiences into the discussion about our organisations and our cultures, and finding that commonality, but finding the things that make us different, and actually making sure our organisations appreciate that. And then everybody becoming that real ally in the movement for racial equality. Just thought I'd share this with you. I don't know if any of you know Audre Lorde. She's a poet, a black poet, and she says some amazing things. And this is something that we've sort of lived by during this programme. sometimes we're blessed being able to choose the time, the arena, and the manner of our revolution. But more usually, we must just do battle where we are standing. And I think it's an interesting quote in terms of where we are in this journey of our whole country becoming much more inclusive. And I just thought it was worth sharing that because I think it's a great quote. So that's what I wanted to share. And I wanted to leave enough time for anybody to ask any questions. So has anybody got any questions about anything I've said, or any comments, or, you know, if they want to share their own experiences of a similar journey that they've gone on?
Oh, so we just got one question here. So are you going to do any similar work for other groups, such as those with disabilities, for example?
That's a really interesting one. And when we started on this, we did have a lot of discussions over, we were focusing on ethnicity and race, but we were also aware from the DICE survey that we did, that we had similar issues in other of the protected characteristics, and the main one that stood out for us was disability. And interestingly, while we had that in our colleague groups, we also have that in our communities as well. And actually, where we got to is two places really. One, that actually we could bite off more than we could chew and try and do something for everybody, and that might just dilute our efforts rather than actually making a difference. The other thing, the other thought that we had is actually, if we get this right in terms of ethnicity, the learning that we will have will help all protected characteristics. So one of the things that's come out of the projects that the various different organisations have been doing, a lot of organisations have started with their recruitment processes. And in starting with their recruitment processes, they have reviewed their recruitment and selection policies and procedures. And in doing that, there has been lots of discussion. So one of the things that we've talked about is in terms of our job adverts. When we word our job adverts, there's a lot of research that says there are certain words that actually can put off certain parts of our community. So there are sort of some words that are very genderized, that actually words that are quite masculine, that would prevent some females from applying for jobs. And I know I saw a study somewhere where certain words sort of that are really sort of dynamic and go-getting and whatever puts about 8% of females off from applying. So one of the organisations in the cohort, Southway Housing, they are actually trialling some software that actually looks at their job adverts when they've written them and highlights any words that would put off certain people from certain protected characteristics. So it picks out those gender-related words. It picks out some of the words that put off some diverse ethnic candidates. So some of those words are, you see adverts sometimes where it says, we work hard and we play hard. Well, in some communities, that's quite off-putting, because play hard for us in a white world means, well, we all go out to the pub afterwards, and that actually is not very inclusive, and that would put off some people from various different diverse backgrounds. So they're trialing some software. So while it's been done under the umbrella of this project, it's actually also assisting the sort of gender equality, and again, the similar words that put off people that have a disability or people from the LGBTQ communities, etc. So while it's focused in this, it's actually helping all protected characteristics. We've equally looked at things like having diverse recruitment panels. There's 2 or 3 organisations that are looking at that. One of them is Riverside. One of them is, I think, THT, L&Q are looking at that. And they've done quite a lot of work on having diverse panels. And that's created another debate of, well, actually, if you've got a Black or Asian face on your panel, so what is that doing? Is that for the candidate to see somebody like them? So actually that makes them feel more at ease? or does that person, what's their role in the decision making? So if they don't agree with the decision, who makes the decision? Is it the manager, where the person will be working? How's that challenge done? So again, that's been quite an interesting debate that we've had and we're learning from. But equally, then the question is, well, actually, do you need somebody disabled on the panel? Do you need somebody from that sort of has got a different characteristic that's very visible? So that started a whole debate on that. And also, as part of some of the work that we've been doing on recruitment, is about how you make people feel at ease. So we have actually, as a partnership, Greater Manchester Housing Providers, we've all shared our competency questions that we have on interviews, and we've been looking at those questions. And then one organisation was saying they always have a question in any of their interviews on people's views of inclusive organisations. What's their view on equality, diversity and inclusion? So we've got these questions now at various different levels. But again, that doesn't just count for race, that's impacting on all those protected characteristics. And then finally, the other thing, a few organisations are trialling guaranteed interview schemes. So we, as Greater Manchester Housing Providers, we are all signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant. So most of us do have a guaranteed interview scheme for veterans, for example, if they meet the minimum criteria for the job. We also have a guaranteed interview scheme for disability. So if somebody's disabled and they meet the minimum criteria, but some organisations are looking at having the same thing for candidates from Black and Asian backgrounds, where they would get a guaranteed interview if they meet the criteria. Some organisations are looking at the sort of principle of the Rooney rule. So where you've got underrepresented groups, you take positive action to get candidates, and this specifically for leadership roles. And that works not just for race and ethnicity, but for disabled candidates as well. So yes, we are focusing on race and ethnicity, but it is helping inclusion across the board in all our organisations. Did that answer your question? It was a very long waffle.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. The next one, what was the reaction from employees when you announced that you're working on this project?
In terms of when we did the pilot, we did it quite sort of low key, and this again was a bit of a learn in terms of how we chose our mentees. So some organisations actually advertised it as an opportunity. Other organisations did specifically go out and pick the mentee that they thought would most benefit from the programme, that had come through whatever processes they have on succession planning within their organisation. So that's been quite interesting, having those two different approaches in terms of how we pick our mentees. And actually, one of the things that came out of the pilot, actually I didn't mention this, and one of the things that came out of the pilot is a few organisations set up forums for their ethnically diverse colleagues. And that was quite interesting, because actually in the first instance, people went out to colleagues from Black, Asian and minoritised ethnic backgrounds. But actually what we then found through the learning in the pilot is actually it doesn't really work to have Black, Asian and minoritized ethnic people all having a conversation themselves. The people that needed to hear that conversation, in the same way that our mentors needed to hear that conversation, was to get white people involved. So that actually meant that we moved our forums on from to be sort of wholly inclusive rather than just for colleagues from that background. So most of the organisations were very, very supportive, and their colleagues were very supportive. But actually, they were quite challenging as well, on the basis that where they are now is as sort of a product of their experience of being in that organisation, and why hadn't we done it before, and why were these things not in place at that time. So we had some difficult conversations there, but on the whole, they are all very, very supportive. Wythenshawe Community Group actually do what they call boost drop-ins. So I think it's once every couple of weeks, they have done a boost drop-in to feed back to their colleagues what's actually happening, but also to open it up for anybody that wants to come to those groups to ask any questions around equality, diversity and inclusion. And when they first launched them, they weren't sure how it would go down. But actually what they've found is they're really, really well attended, and not just by sort of Black and Asian and minoritized ethnic colleagues, but white colleagues as well, who also have other things to talk about for other protective characteristics. So again, that's actually started to change the whole of the conversation in their organisations. So on the whole, it's gone down very well. We have had some challenge in some other areas. And exactly what the first question was, that's all very well that you're doing it on race, but what about disability? What about LGBTQ and whatever? And we've had to go back and say, well, we might look at that in the future, but at the moment, our big issue is that we know we are not reflective of our communities, and we know we have a real problem because our organisations are primarily run by white people, and our customers are from very, very diverse backgrounds, and there is a real disconnect. And anybody that's sort of looking at the news at the moment in terms of social housing, and you're seeing the things that are on there in terms of damp and mould and antisocial behaviour and the communities that we serve, it's so obvious that we've got this real disconnect and we need to get it. And that was the driver for the whole thing in the first place.
Fantastic. I'll just wait and see if we've got any more. What were the main challenges that happened before and during the programme rollout, both from the mentors and mentees sides?
The real challenges. So I mentioned as I was going through the presentation, one of the real challenges was psychological safety and people coming forward and people talking about their experiences. And I think one of the things that we learned as white people, and I suppose this came through the Black Lives Matter as well, is the level of pain and hurt that some of our colleagues from Black, Asian and minoritized ethnics really feel about how they're treated. And that was really difficult. And that was that slide on how we receive that information, because the tendency is, because of all our biases, the tendency is that there is that feeling of defensiveness around it, and there is that feeling of not wanting to accept it, the denial about it, and that has been a difficult process. One of the things that we found as well is by starting to have these conversations and almost giving some of our Black, Asian and minoritized ethnic colleagues permission to talk about it, that actually that's been quite a painful process for them. It's brought up almost some of that sort of trauma of the past coming back. And actually sometimes that's been quite difficult to control. So it's come out in the wrong place, in the wrong time, with the wrong people. And that's we've had to sort of manage some of those situations. There have been some issues where we found that actually people almost think that because we're doing this programme, that actually then for some of those senior positions that somehow white people are going to be excluded from them. And one of the things that we've been really mindful of is that where we do get to the situation that we start to appoint, we get people in some of those senior positions, we've got to make sure that they're there on merit, and people aren't just going to say they're there because of the colour of their skin. And you know, I'm very old. I can go back to the 70s where we had a very similar situation with sort of gender and women going into some of those senior roles. And in some cases, people were so keen to appoint women and get that equality that the wrong people were appointed in those roles. And you put one person in that role that's wrong and they fail. And that somehow becomes, you know, everybody. And I remember going through a stage of people saying, I wouldn't work for a woman, and woman bosses this, and woman. And it was sort of because sometimes we put the wrong people in those roles, and we're very mindful that this is all got to be based on merit, and it's all got to be based on the right people in the right job at the right time. What we are trying to do is to open those pathways up, remove those barriers, and make sure that the culture in our organisations is very inclusive, so that everybody can thrive. That's not just Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues, it's white people as well, that we can all thrive together regardless of who we are, what our backgrounds are, what protected characteristics we might have. And also there's the whole issue of intersectionality as well. People don't just have one of those protected characteristics. Quite often there's a number of things that play, and actually what we need is very inclusive organisations with the right culture so everybody can thrive and be themselves at work.
Fantastic, thank you. Just check if we've got any more questions. I can't see any for the time being. So a huge thank you to Elaine for the presentation, and for also hosting Explorer. There were some really powerful things shared there, and there's a lot of learnings for all of us. We'll be uploading these slides and the recording to the website, so please signpost colleagues that may have missed out today. But yeah, big thank you for this. The peer-to-peer learning at the Charter is really crucial, and it's really important that we hear these things. So yeah, thank you for attending, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you on a future event. Thank you. Goodbye.